They didn't even say it to my face. I found out through the absence of sound. No phone call, no message, no card, just a single post on Aunt Valerie's Facebook, a photo glossy, curated, cruel, our annual family Christmas full house, full hearts, no one missing, no one missing. Except I wasn't in that photo. I wasn't even near the house. I was standing outside their gate, holding a gift bag in my gloved hand, breath fogging in the December cold, as the security guard said, "I'm sorry, miss. Your name isn't on the guest list, but so." And that's how I found out. They hadn't just forgotten me. They had removed me. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just nodded, turned around, and walked back down the driveway like a ghost. The snow crunched beneath my boots like bones. In my hand was a small red gift bag wrapped in ribbon, holding a hand-knitted scarf, 2 artisan candles, and a tin of homemade cookies I spent 3 nights perfecting. I made them for the cousins who used to share bunk beds with me, for the aunt who once cried at my high school graduation, for the uncle who helped fix my mom's leaky faucet before she passed. But none of that mattered anymore, because none of them had spoken to me in 2 years. It started after my mother died. Ivy Blake, the orphan girl with the wrong address, the wrong last name, the wrong bank account. When my mom passed, she left me a small apartment in the old district, a box of photos, and debts. So many debts. But I didn't ask for help. Not when the heating broke, not when I had to choose between rent and groceries, and especially not when Aunt Valerie messaged me a month after the funeral and said, "You know we're all grieving, Ivy, but maybe some space would be good for all of us." I gave them that space, I gave them silence, and apparently they mistook that silence for disappearance. So this year, they simply deleted me. As I walked away from that mansion, snow collecting in the folds of my coat, I realized something that cut deeper than any insult ever could. I wasn't poor because of money. I was poor because I had nothing they considered valuable. Not a job worth bragging about, not a surname on a legacy wall, not a seat at their table. And that night, something inside me cracked open, not in grief, but in clarity. I didn't cry when I got home. I didn't even take off my boots. I stood in the middle of my apartment, lights off, and whispered, "They think this is the end of my story." But it wasn't, it was just the chapter break. Let me tell you something about pain. It teaches you how to listen. When you're not invited, you start hearing things most people miss, like how your landlord forgets your name when collecting rent, or how your coworker suggests you probably don't celebrate the holidays like we do, or how the bank manager smiles a little too sympathetically when you walk in wearing thrifted shoes. Every moment becomes a lesson in invisibility, but if you pay close attention, invisibility is power. Because when they stop looking, like you start moving. In the weeks that followed, I worked double shifts, overtime, delivery runs, night audits. I cleaned floors in office buildings where the toilets were gold-plated. I refilled the espresso bars of lawyers who'd never learned my name. And in those long, silent corridors, I started learning not just how to survive, but how to rise. One night, while I was mopping the marble floors of the old Harlan building, a man in a charcoal suit approached me. He looked like a ghost from another era, crisp hat, leather gloves, eyes like iron. He said, "You clean like someone who wants to be somewhere else." I looked up and said, "That's because I do." He nodded. Then he asked if I'd ever considered real estate. That was the night I met Mr. Harlan, the last true gentleman left in that city. He owned 4 commercial properties. No children, no heirs, just a sharp eye for people who didn't flinch when disrespected. He started talking to me every week, slipping me books, real estate manuals, case studies, offering paid hours to shadow his staff. I didn't understand why he believed in me. Maybe he saw the way I never complained. Maybe he saw himself in me uninvited to too many tables. When Mr. Harlan passed away the following winter, I cried harder than I had at my mother's funeral. Because he left me something that no one else ever had, a key. Not just to a building, to a future. A legal shell company was formed under my name, Blake Holdings. With it, I began to rebuild slow, silent, and precise. No announcements, no showboating. I stayed quiet, but I never stayed still. And while they posted holiday photos, while they clinked glasses over wine, I was laying foundations, literally, one brick, one blueprint, one belief at a time. And now 2 years later, on a rooftop in Midtown, I'm looking down at the same family who once called me too poor to attend. They're walking into the newly renovated the Harlan Legacy Center for a private family event they booked through an agency. They don't know the owner. They don't know whose name is on every cornerstone. They don't know that the welcome sign above the door was designed by the same girl they left outside in the cold. But they will, very soon. They thought I disappeared, but I was studying, not just real estate, not just contracts. I was studying them, the way they spoke to people they thought were beneath them, the way they raised their glasses in champagne toasts without ever asking who poured it, the way they said success runs in the blood while sitting in buildings built by other people's labor. They believed wealth meant worth, and I was poor, which, in their eyes, made me unworthy. But poverty isn't just a lack of money. It's the look someone gives you when you hand them a resume with no family name on it. It's the weight of walking into a room and knowing no one's expecting you to be there. It's hearing your name only when someone needs to explain why you didn't belong. And I had felt that weight every single day of my life. Until Mr. Harlan gave me something heavier responsibility. I remember sitting across from a banker 2 weeks after Harlan passed documents in front of me. Ownership shares transferred. Everything legal. He didn't look me in the eye. He just said, "You're sure you want to keep the holding company under your name?" I said. Not my name. The one they never bothered to learn. Blake Holdings. A name they had laughed at. A name that now owned a 6-story building and was preparing to acquire more. I didn't throw parties, didn't buy cars, didn't post a single photo. Every dollar I earned, I reinvested. Every insult they once whispered, I engraved into ambition. Every night they toasted without me, I spent calculating ROI. I learned zoning law in my sleep, taught myself capital stacking with old textbooks and YouTube lectures. Sat in on investor calls under a fake name, just to hear how they moved money without moving their feet. They had inheritance. I had intention. And intention, when it doesn't announce itself, becomes unstoppable. The first building I acquired on my own was the same office I used to clean at midnight, the same place where the HR woman once called me, "You people." I bought it from a developer going bankrupt, rebranded the lease, installed energy-efficient elevators, tripled its value in 18 months. I never stepped foot inside it again, because revenge wasn't the goal. Ownership was ownership. They say success is the best revenge. But that's a lie. The best revenge is becoming the kind of person they have to introduce themselves to. And I was getting there quietly, methodically, with no need for approval, until one email changed everything. Subject: Blake Holdings, rooftop venue inquiry, from Valerie, thorn@thorndynasty.org. I stared at it for a full minute before opening it. Aunt Valerie. The same woman who once told my mother she was lucky to even be allowed into their family. She wanted to rent my rooftop for the upcoming Thorn Holiday Gala. She wrote, "We're looking for an elegant, exclusive space with city views, something newly developed, modern, but with legacy." Legacy, that word. The same one they said I'd never have. I didn't reply. I forwarded it to my assistant, using my pseudonym Elena Voss, Director of Events. We approved the booking, full payment up front. No clue that the owner they'd be toasting under was the same girl they left outside the gate. In the days leading up to the event, I visited the rooftop alone. Midnight, no lights. Just the hum of the city below. I stood where they would stand sipping cocktails, pretending they built empires with their bare hands. And I whispered to the wind, "You told me I didn't belong at your table." So I built the building around it. I had no intention of revealing myself. Not yet. But fate, as always, has better timing than I do. 2 days before the gala, I got a call from someone I hadn't heard from in years, Ava, my cousin. The only one who ever defended me when I was younger, the one who stopped calling when I got too intense about work. She said, "Ivy, is it true? Are you the one behind Blake Holdings?" I paused, took a breath, then said, "What do you think?" She didn't answer right away, just sighed. "They don't know. Not yet. But if you're planning something, please be kind. Grandma's going to be there." I looked out the window. Rain hit the glass like applause from another dimension. I said, "Kindness isn't absence of truth, Ava. It's just choosing how you reveal it." The night of the gala came fast. I didn't dress to shock them. Just a simple black gown, hair pinned, no label, no diamonds. But I walked through my own building like I belonged, because I did. And when I reached the elevator, gold-framed, custom-lit, floors polished like pride, I pressed PH, penthouse. They were already there, clinking glasses, laughing in circles, talking about market downturns they'd never personally felt, mocking upstart investors as they stood on my rooftop. I stood by the entrance for a moment, watching, not with anger, with awareness. They hadn't changed, still naming chairs after themselves, still pretending their last name was a brand instead of a borrowed shield. But this time, I didn't want to be invited. I was the landlord. I stepped forward, lifted a glass of untouched champagne, and when Aunt Valerie turned and her eyes landed on me, her entire body stiffened. She opened her mouth, then closed it. I smiled. "Good evening," I said. "Welcome to the building." There was a moment, just one, where no one spoke. It lasted maybe 3 seconds, but in that silence, I could hear it all. Recognition, confusion, and fear. Aunt Valerie was the first to break. She gave a polite, almost mechanical laugh. Well, if it isn't little Ivy, the same woman who once said my hair was too wild for family portraits, the same woman who sent me holiday cards 2 years in a row, addressed to Isla. Now she smiled like we were old friends reunited. "We didn't know this was your place," she said, glancing around, trying to gauge the exits, the optics, the damage. I didn't move. I let them squirm, not to be cruel, but to remind them of something they'd long forgotten. I was never small. They just never looked closely. One by one, the others turned to face me. Cousin Drew, who once told everyone I worked somewhere, with a mop. Uncle Henry, who said my mother should have married up if she wanted her daughter to count. They didn't speak, but their eyes did. And their silence was the most honest they'd ever been. "Thank you all for coming," I said calmly, glass still in hand. This building, this event space, this rooftop, every inch of it was designed with intention. Someone cleared their throat. Nervous. I continued. "See, 2 years ago, I stood outside a different party, in the cold, holding a gift that no one would open, wearing shoes that had holes in the bottom. Now they were listening. Even the bartender had stopped pouring. Back then, I thought being poor meant I had nothing to offer. That value came from bloodlines and dinner invites. But I was wrong. Value comes from vision, from resilience, from building something brick by brick while everyone else is busy posting their next glass of Chardonnay." I paused, let that sink, then looked directly at Aunt Valerie. "So yes, I own this building, and tonight, I wanted to see something I thought I needed for years. Closure." She forced another smile. "Well, then, congratulations. Truly, what a surprise." It was the first time I realized she wasn't angry. She was afraid. Not of me, but of the shift, the narrative collapsing. The girl they mocked now had structure under her feet and their names on her lease. I didn't stay long, just long enough. Enough for the cameras to catch the right angle. Enough for the whispers to ripple across their curated little universe. Enough to remind them that the girl in clearance shoes was now the woman who approved their valet passes. As I turned to leave, I noticed something near the back of the rooftop, a small figure, standing alone by the heater. A young woman barely 20 wearing a modest dress and flats that didn't fit right. Her name tag said event staff, and she looked exactly like I did at that age. I walked over. She straightened nervously, not sure if she should speak. I said gently, "How long have you been working?" She blinked. "Since noon. Breaks." She shook her head. "They're short-staffed tonight." I reached into my clutch and pulled out a slim envelope. Inside, a handwritten check and a business card. "Take this. And when you're ready, call me. No pressure. Just a door." Her hands trembled as she took it. Why, she whispered. I looked back at the sea of velvet gowns and silver trays and said, "Because someone once saw something in me before I saw it in myself. And because girls like us deserve to own the roof we work under." Back inside, the music picked up again. They'd moved on, or at least pretended to. But I knew the truth. I wasn't a footnote anymore. I was the headline they didn't write because it made them uncomfortable. I didn't need their claps, didn't crave their apologies. What I needed was to stand in the very space they said I'd never reach and breathe. When I stepped into the elevator to leave, I didn't look back, but just before the doors closed, I heard it. A single voice, soft, unsure. Ivy? Wait, it was Ava, my cousin. She walked toward me slowly, arms crossed over her silk shawl like it could shield her from memory. Can we talk? I tilted my head. About everything. About how we let it happen. About how I let it happen. I nodded. Someday. But not tonight. Why not? Because tonight isn't about explanations. It's about witness. The doors closed. And for the first time in years, I exhaled. Without a knot in my chest. Not because I had proven anything to them, but because I had finally proven something to myself. I didn't need to be part of their story. I was always meant to write my own. Later that night, I stood by my apartment window. No glitter, no noise, just skyline and stillness. In my hand was the same red gift bag I had tried to deliver 2 years ago. The scarf, the candles, the cookies now long gone. But the bag remained. I placed it on the shelf beside my deeds and contracts, not as a symbol of pain, but as a reminder, even when they don't open the door, you can build your own, and one day, they'll pay to walk through it. The next morning, the tabloids called it a stunning twist of fate. They had no idea how many nights I spent building it. No one wrote about the skipped meals, the landlord threats, the cold subway rides at 2 a.m., clutching textbooks that smelled like dust and desperation. No one wrote about the girl who was turned away at a family gate. Only the woman who now stood on a rooftop, owning the view. And that was fine. Let them discover the myth. I lived through the reality. Emails flooded the company inbox by noon. Venue inquiries, press requests, profiles and power from magazines that once ignored me. My assistant forwarded one with the subject line, "Can we feature your story as a holiday miracle?" I laughed. "Miracle," I replied. This was arithmetic, not magic. I did the math they refused to do. The hours, the grind, the compounding value of being underestimated. I turned their silence into equity. And now they couldn't raise a glass without toasting under my name. 3 days after the event, I received a courier envelope, no return address. Inside a folded letter, neat cursive, no salutation. You made your point. Loud and clear. I hope it brought you peace. We all move forward now. Please don't make this a public vendetta. Signed, Valerie. I stared at the ink like it was a joke. Peace, I wasn't seeking peace. I was seeking restoration. Of voice, of worth, of truth. They thought this was about revenge, but this was about memory. Because memory is power. And families like mine count on you to forget. Forget how they cut you out. Forget the closed doors, forget the humiliation they dressed up as tradition. But I don't forget. I collect. Every word, every smirk, every moment they tried to shrink me into something more manageable. And now I use it brick by brick, blueprint by blueprint to build something they can't erase. I drafted a reply. Brief, precise. Valerie, I didn't make my point to be loud. I made it to be seen, for once. I never mailed it. She didn't deserve the final word. Instead, I spent the next week doing something far more meaningful. I began a foundation, not a charity for headlines, not a PR stunt, a real fund. For young women raised like I was just outside the gate, girls who didn't get the invitations, didn't have the right surname, didn't grow up knowing that power can be taught, not inherited. I named it after someone who never lived to see me own the skyline. The Maria Blake Initiative, my mother's name, my clearest memory, my fire. I used my own capital, no donors, no sponsors, just me. And I made the first grant to Talia, the young staff girl from the gala. Turns out she wasn't just helping with coat check. She was sleeping in her car. 2 jobs, no family, 1 shot. Now she has a studio, a mentor, and a future with her name on the lease. She cried when I handed her the keys. I just said, "Make them regret not seeing you sooner." Meanwhile, the family chat threads started cracking. Ava messaged me again. They're still pretending it was a coincidence. That you just happened to be there? I replied, let them. Because nothing scares people who weaponize exclusion more than the idea that the one they pushed out doesn't need back in. At a brunch 2 weeks later, I ran into Henry, my uncle, with the white smile and darker words. He was hosting some investor thing at a hotel I partially owned through a secondary holding. He didn't know. He waved at me like none of it happened. Ivy, you look successful. I looked him dead in the eye and said, I am? He reached out for a hug. I didn't move. I simply added, You're welcome for the discounted venue rate. The truth is, I don't need their shame. I don't need their applause. And I sure as hell don't need their acceptance. Because I no longer build for them. I build for girls who were told they were too loud, too poor, too emotional, too ambitious, too much. I build so they know they were never too much. The world was just too small for them. One evening, as the sun fell behind the skyline I now partially owned, I sat on the rooftop alone. No guests, no champagne, just quiet. I took a deep breath and let it fill my chest, not with pride, with proof. Proof that the girl in the clearance coat, turned away at the gate, now signs the contracts others have to read twice. And beneath me, they were still raising their glasses, still laughing at stories they never lived, still pretending the empire hadn't shifted. But I knew, I felt it in the steel beneath my feet. I felt it in the way the wind no longer pushed me back. I was no longer knocking on doors. I was designing the locks. There's a strange peace that comes when you stop waiting. Waiting for recognition, for apologies, for someone to say, we were wrong about you. I used to rehearse the moment in my head, what I'd say if they finally invited me back, if they finally said they were sorry, if they finally saw me. But now I realize I never needed an invitation. I needed clarity, and clarity came not in noise but in silence. Weeks passed. The rooftop gala became nothing more than a hushed footnote in their circles, an awkward anecdote, a minor hiccup, quickly swept under the rug of tradition, but they couldn't unsee what they saw that night. They couldn't unknow that I had risen, quietly, precisely, without their help. And that's what terrified them most. That I didn't scream, that I didn't beg, that I didn't break. I simply arrived. Ava reached out again, this time with something different. No excuses, no explanations, just a photo. It was a picture of me taken from the side during the rooftop event. My head turned, city lights behind me, one arm at my side, the other holding a champagne glass I never drank. She captioned it, "The woman we should have been looking at all along." I didn't reply. Not because I didn't appreciate it, but because that chapter was closed. And I don't read from books I've already rewritten. Instead, I turned my focus toward the thing that truly mattered: legacy. Not the kind they talked about over will readings, not the kind etched in granite walls no one visits. I mean living legacy. The kind that feeds people, shelters them, lifts their heads when the world tries to bow them into silence. So, I expanded the Maria Blake Initiative. We launched a co-working space downtown for young women who aged out of the foster system. We set up seed grants, no strings attached, for business ideas the banks wouldn't touch. We didn't ask for pedigree, only purpose, because I remember what it felt like to be seen as a liability instead of a life. One afternoon, as we were preparing for the opening of our second facility, Talia came to my office. She was shaking, holding a stack of letters. "You need to see this," she said softly. It was mail, dozens of handwritten notes, not from journalists, not from donors, from girls, from young women in tiny towns and overstuffed apartments, from mothers, from students. Each letter told the same story. "I didn't think I could do this until I saw you did." Some had pressed flowers inside. Some included photos of their first apartment keys. One had a single line written in pencil, "Your story made space for mine." I cried. Not a sob, not a breakdown, just quiet tears, soft. Sure, full of something I'd never had the language for before. Grace, not the kind they use in speeches, the kind you give yourself, when you stop trying to earn what should have been freely given. Later that week, I passed by the old neighborhood, the street where my mother and I used to walk, the corner deli where we once celebrated birthdays with sandwiches and orange soda. The store was closed now, but across the street, a new sign hung above an old brick building, the Blake House Resource and Resilience Center. I stood there for a long time, not out of pride, out of memory, because everything I built started from nothing, and nothing is where some of us are told we belong. But that's a lie. We belong everywhere we are willing to build. Eventually, I wrote a letter, not to the family, to myself. I keep it in my nightstand, I'll share it with you because if you've made it this far, maybe you need it too. Dear Ivy, they tried to define you by absence, no wealth, no title, no invitation, but you gave yourself presence. You became structure, foundation, vision. You were never too poor to belong. They were too blind to see. And when the time came, you didn't knock. You didn't beg. You built the door and turned the key, yours, in full power, Ivy. Now, every holiday season, when their photos flood social media gathered around firelit tables and curated outfits, I smile. Not out of envy, out of peace. Because I finally understand I don't need a seat at their table. I built my own. And it's open to everyone they left behind.